welcome to Planet America's Weekend Edition. Here in the Situation Room, I'm John Barron.
And I'm Licciardello, and we have a situation.
President Trump declared his intent to, quote, go after people.
The leader of the gang was President Obama.
There is not a serious case here for treason.
The Trump administration has released more than 200,000 documents related to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
This is not about discovery. This is about misdirection.
Look over there. Trump deploys weapons of mass distraction to try and end the outcry over the Epstein files. We'll talk to podcaster Tara Palmeri about what he might have to hide.
And Trump's at war with his own Federal Reserve chair. Economist Justin Wolfers weighs in on that one. But first...
It was the week President Trump tried to divert attention away from his supporters demanding the release of all the files on the Epstein scandal by accusing one of his predecessors of treason.
Barack Hussein Obama, have you heard of him?
Well, yes.
It's there, he's guilty. This was treason. This was every word you can think of. They tried to steal the election.
In an apparent effort to quell growing dissent within Trump's MAGA support base, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard tried to dangle a shinier object.
The implications of this are frankly nothing short of historic. Over 100 documents that we released on Friday really detail and provide evidence of how this treasonous conspiracy was directed by President Obama just weeks before he was due to leave office, after President Trump had already gotten elected.
Gabbard claims the Obama administration's intelligence officials manufactured and politicised intelligence to lay the groundwork for the FBI's Russia investigation into Trump. But Gabbard, a former Democrat who was also once accused by Hillary Clinton of being a Russian asset, seems to have been peddling another conspiracy theory dressed up as fact. As Washington Post fact-checker Glenn Kessler explained, Gabbard's alleged seditious conspiracy flies in the face of the conclusions of 4 previous investigations totalling more than 2,500 pages. Her report provides no indication that she studied the earlier investigations, yet she asserts there was direct intent to cover up the truth about what occurred. Gabbard simply ignores facts, including that it was a Republican-dominated Senate Intelligence Committee, not Obama, that ultimately concluded Russia's intent was to harm the Clinton campaign, tarnish an expected Clinton presidential administration, and help the Trump campaign. Republicans, including now Secretary of State Marco Rubio, put their names to that. But of course, the usual suspects fell into line.
The Obama administration manufactured and politicized intelligence to create a narrative that the Kremlin was trying to influence the 2016 presidential election. This is the origins of Russia, Russia, Russia.
And it wasn't just a Senate Intelligence Committee report contradicting Gabbard. There was a year-long special counsel in Trump's first term, the Durham report, which contradicted that. Kash Patel went through the same documents as Gabbard in 2020, no problems. John Ratcliffe released a CIA report into the same events only 2 weeks ago, John. All of them agreed with the intelligence community's basic conclusions from the time. So what specifically is Gabbard's issue here? Honestly, it's a little confusing. This was Gabbard's summary of her initial claims.
That there was a shift, a 180-degree shift from the intelligence community's assessment leading up to the election to the one that President Obama directed be produced after Donald Trump won the election, that completely contradicted those assessments that had come previously.
Okay, so she's essentially suggesting that for 4 months, the intelligence community was saying one thing, that the Russians couldn't affect the election and didn't affect it. Then on December 9, 2016, Obama calls them into this secret meeting and instructs them to change their story, and then they do a total 180. But in reality, what's happened is she's cherry-picked quotes from before the meeting of the intelligence community saying that the Russians couldn't hack into election infrastructure, which they still say they can't. And then she's conflated that with, after the meeting, some selective quotes focusing on Russia trying to influence the election by hacking into Democratic emails and leaking them, and also running a social media campaign. So yes, they're saying different things before and after this Obama meeting, but about different topics. And within each topic, they're actually quite consistent. But then it gets more confusing because Gabbard had another set of declassifications 2 days later, a House Republican report from 2017, and they contradicted Gabbard's first claims because they didn't dispute the intelligence community's 2016 conclusion that Russia and its president meddled in the election in the hopes of damaging Hillary Clinton. But what this report did do was question the intelligence community's conclusion that Putin aspired to see Trump win. So they reckon while Russia tried to damage Hillary Clinton's election chances, Russia didn't care who won. They thought it was a win-win situation for them either way. Now look, maybe the House report was right about that. Maybe the intelligence community's judgment was off. I don't know. But either way, I'm not sure it's a big deal, John. They just made a different judgment call. No one committed treason.
Yeah, it is gaslighting on a grand scale. Meanwhile, on his social media site, President Trump was posting AI images of his predecessor being arrested over this alleged conspiracy, bizarrely set to the tune of the Village People's YMCA. And if the Epstein distraction strategy wasn't already abundantly, even embarrassingly clear at this point, Trump, as he often does, said the quiet bit out loud, literally coaching Republican lawmakers on how to deflect every question they get with his new talking point about Obama.
Remember this, Obama cheated on the election. And we have it cold, hard, blue, and it's getting even more so because the stuff that's coming in is not even believable. So, and you should mention that every time they give you a question that's not appropriate, just say, oh, by the way, Obama cheated on the election.
He's right, you know, it's not believable.
Yep.
Although Trump did generously give them a live demonstration of exactly how you turn a question about Epstein around into Trump's preferred topic.
Are you concerned that your Deputy Attorney General, as your former attorney, would be conducting the interview, given...
No, I have no concern. He's a very talented person. He's very smart. I didn't know that they were going to do it. I don't really follow that too much. It's sort of a witch hunt, just a continuation of the witch hunt. The witch hunt that you should be talking about is they caught President Obama absolutely cold, Tulsi Gabbard.
That's how it's done.
Yeah, indeed. Well, Tulsi Gabbard, she had a busy week. She did Trump another solid by dumping a bunch of more than 230,000 pages of documents relating to the 1968 assassination of civil rights leader Dr. Martin Luther King. And the best that Gabbard could spruik in all of this was some information about James Earl Ray's former cellmate, who stated he discussed with Ray an alleged assassination plot. Interesting, hardly any kind of smoking gun. Dr. King's daughter, Bernice, wasn't buying it. She posted it on Twitter X. Now to the Epstein files. Trump's other targets this week included Stephen Colbert, California Democrat Adam Shifty Schiff, Obama's UN ambassador Samantha Power, and then, completely out of left field, he called for the reinstatement of racially inappropriate sports teams' names like the Redskins and the Indians. And then he posted a bunch of random video clips, including a woman in a bikini catching a snake. Well played, madam. But most of his ire was focused on the Wall Street Journal, who kicked along the Epstein story, printing details of a letter allegedly written by Trump to Epstein to mark his 50th birthday in 2003. The Journal describes Trump's letter as, quote, bawdy and written in the outline of a naked woman, which appears to be hand-drawn with a heavy marker. And the note concludes with, "May every day be another wonderful secret," which may have just been a reference to Epstein's financial management of the lingerie brand Victoria's Secret, but it does sound particularly creepy in the subsequent light of his other secrets involving child sex trafficking. Trump claimed this letter was a fake.
These are not my words, not the way I talk. Also, I don't draw pictures.
But within minutes of him posting that, the internet was flooded with pictures that Trump had drawn, many of which had been auctioned for charities. And Reuters quoted the president's words from his 2008 tome, "Trump, never give up, how I turned my biggest challenges into success."
It takes me a few minutes to draw something. In my case, it's usually a building or a cityscape of skyscrapers.
Yes, and sometimes he draws pictures of naked ladies with his signature as pubic hair, apparently, Chaz. But Trump, meanwhile, says he's suing everyone involved in publishing this article, including Wall Street Journal owner Rupert Murdoch, who of course also owns the previously Trump-friendly Fox News, so that'll be an interesting case to watch.
Yeah, another one of those classic Trump $10 billion lawsuits we love so much, and I suspect this lawsuit is not going to last one day past the moment they ask him for a sworn deposition about Epstein. Think about it, Donald. But what is he trying to distract from with all these shiny objects, John? Well, firstly, Trump's supposed transparency in calling for the Epstein grand jury transcripts has already been exposed. There were 3 Epstein grand juries, 2 in New York, 1 in Florida, and the Florida one has already rejected Trump's request. The judge said his hands are tied because there is a binding precedent in the 11th Circuit, where Florida is, to almost never release grand jury testimony. The judge did note, though, that there are 2 other circuits where it is easier to get grand jury transcripts released. One of those circuits is the 2nd Circuit, where New York is. So Trump might have more luck unsealing grand jury testimony there. Of even more concern, though, to Trump was yet another Wall Street Journal scoop, they never learn, that back in May, Attorney General Pam Bondi apparently told Trump that his name was in the Epstein files, along with many other high-profile figures. And to be fair, that doesn't mean he did anything wrong. The files contain hundreds of names. Officials felt many of those names, including Trump's, were simply there because of unverified hearsay. Okay, so we do need to point that out. But still, not a story that Trump would be enjoying.
No.
Although Elon Musk, on the other hand, would be loving it. Recall Musk tweeting, "Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. That's the real reason they have not been made public," during their spat. I'm sorry we ever doubted you, Elon. You knew. And if you want to know why Trump's trying to distract from these stories, just observe what Trump's biggest fan, the QAnon shaman, is now saying. This stupid piece of shit, what a fraud. Ouch! And here's a story that Trump really doesn't want you to focus on. Todd Blanche, second in charge of the Department of Justice and Trump's personal lawyer, mind you, tweeted out that the Department of Justice is reaching out to Ghislaine Maxwell to ask, "What do you know?" "I intend to meet with her soon," he said. "No one's above the law and no lead is off limits." So, John, what is that about? Why haven't they talked to Ghislaine Maxwell sometime in the last 6 years? And why are they sending such a senior figure, the number 2 in the Department of Justice and Trump's personal lawyer, to talk to her rather than some underling? Could they be offering this serial sexual abuser some kind of deal, perhaps, to avoid 20 years of jail time in return for her saying, I don't know, something maybe about the president? Maybe.
So cynical, Chaz, so cynical. I'll tell you what, though, if there was any remaining doubt that Trump's supporters are already trying to flip the script on Ghislaine Maxwell, who, remember, was found guilty of trafficking children for sex. Take a look at this today from Newsmax.
I do have a feeling that she just might be a victim. She just might be. There was a rush to judgment. There was a lot of chaos there for a while.
No, she had a 1-month trial before a jury who found her guilty. She's not a victim. She is a perpetrator, a convicted sex offender. She facilitated and participated in Jeffrey Epstein's abuse of minor girls. Victims were as young as 14 years old when they were groomed and abused by Maxwell and Epstein. Well, for more, we're joined by investigative journalist Tara Palmeri. She's covered the first Trump White House for Politico, CNN and ABC America. She hosted a podcast series focusing on Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Tara, welcome to you. What have you made of the president's efforts this week to distract us all from the Epstein scandal? And do you think it's working?
I think they're pathetic. I don't think they're working at all. I mean, they're creating things like they're going back to Hillary's emails, lock up Barack Obama, bring back a racist name of a football club. I mean, it's literally, they're just pulling a rabbit out of a hat, trying anything to try to get people to not pay attention to Jeffrey Epstein, but they realize the pressure valve is still on them, so they're starting to deflate it a little bit. The only person that has actually been indicted, I mean, she wouldn't talk unless she thought she was going to get something out of it. And I think that's the fear that a lot of the victims that I've spoke to have said that they have.
So do you think Ghislaine Maxwell's been set up to clear Trump publicly in return for a commutation of her sentence?
Absolutely. I mean, That's what it looks like. What other purpose do they have in interviewing Ghislaine Maxwell when they could interview the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, who recall being trafficked to numerous Johns, who have the same stories over and over and over again? Why wouldn't they go to them? Why wouldn't they go back to the many files that they have? What's the point in talking to Ghislaine Maxwell then to get her to say, Donald Trump has been cleared from this, he was never involved in any way, and then wink, wink, nod, nod, she's got some sort of leniency, clemency, maybe a commuted sentence, maybe a pardon.
Tara, we have seen more linkages being published this week between Epstein and Trump, not just the now infamous birthday letter that Trump allegedly wrote, but also photos of Epstein at Trump's 1993 wedding, reports of Epstein victims saying that Trump leered at them and made them feel uncomfortable. Knowing what you know about the nature of their friendship over many years, what does this add to your understanding?
I mean, it confirms what I've already known. A lot of the victims I've spoken to remember meeting Donald Trump. He was around. He even spoke to a lawyer for one of the victims and said that they were friends. And that when he was at his home once, he asked him why there were so many young girls at the pool. And Epstein told him it was a big brother, little sister program. Very creepy, right? They spent a lot of time together. And they lived in Palm Beach, in the Upper East Side. They swam in the same social circles. He said he's a great guy. You know, he's known him forever. And he remarked that he liked girls that were young. It was no secret what Jeffrey Epstein was up to. In fact, he flaunted it. He liked to show off that he had these young girls around him. The way that it was that they were just party favors. They didn't really matter. And there was very little interest in the humanity of these people. But it was not surprising to me at all. In fact, there are tons of pictures of them together, leering at girls.
Tara, a federal court judge this week ruled against the release of grand jury testimony in the Epstein case. Does that, do you think, end the matter, or could we still see more attempts to get that into the public domain?
I think it will end that effort. She doesn't want it out either. She doesn't want the grand jury testimony out, Ghislaine Maxwell. I think they've made that pretty clear. It does not make her look like a martyr. And at this point, she wants to seem as innocent as possible. And there's no interest in getting that out for her. And there's really, if Trump is planning to commute her sentence or pardon her, then he wouldn't want that out either, because it's disgusting.
Tara, are you really that interested in the grand jury materials in particular, or is there some other info that you'd like to see released publicly instead?
Yeah, the grand jury material is really based on a lot of other material that's already in the public domain, and a lot of these girls already came out. I don't think there's anything in these documents that would open the case in any way. No one would be surprised. It would tell the story of a woman who was a groomer and a pedophile. And I don't think there would be anything new in it, and that's why they're offering it up.
What is your gut telling you at this point, Tara? Is President Trump engaged in a cover-up, or has he been caught out essentially not covering up something because there's nothing there to cover up?
Well, we'll never know until we see the files, right? Because when someone says, look away, nothing to see here, it's the worst thing you can say.
Democrat Senator Ron Wyden's been following the money on Epstein for years now. He says there are $1.5 billion of suspicious transactions from Epstein, potentially involving sex trafficking. Do you think that's going to be a fruitful line of inquiry?
Absolutely. It's always been a follow the money thing with this story. Although I do think the operation was pretty simple. He trafficked young girls to powerful men. He had compromise on them. He then demanded their money and was their financier. I think it's pretty simple.
So given where we are with this circus, what do you hope the DOJ does from here?
I think they should actually prosecute cases. I think they should actually stand up some cases, go through this, put up an entire unit, an Epstein unit, go through John by John by John with transparency. Maybe get a special counsel since Pam Bondi's an obvious liar, and do right by the victims who feel like they still haven't gotten enough. And that would be, I think that would be enough. And also reveal the files that you can. I mean, if you look in the vault and the FBI vault on Epstein, it's all redacted. All redacted. Why do we not even have some of the flight logs? I mean, there's so many roadblocks in this story. It's only going to cause more questions.
And Tara, finally, based on you having covered the first Trump administration and knowing how he operates, what do you think he does from here?
I think he's just going to continue to try to create controversies every single day. I mean, think about this. The U.S. House of Representatives was dismissed because they did not want to deal with this. Dismissed. They're all home for recess right now. What private company would have that happen because of a scandal? This is unprecedented. It's not going away. It's not going away. And if he does do anything for Ghislaine Maxwell in exchange for clearance of his name, I mean, there will be an uproar from the victims. I'm sure of it.
Tara Palmeri, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
When I wake up, well, I know I'm gonna tweet. I'm gonna tweet that Jeffrey Epstein's list ain't true. And then Pim Bondi, well, I know she'll take the heat for saying it was on her desk for a review.
Sitting on my desk right now.
When I say that, my supporters are all weak, then you'd better not complain or else I'll sue. And Tulsi Gabbard, yeah, she'll come and rescue me by making up some phony shit about a coup. And I would hide 5,000 files, and I would hide 5,000 more, so that you don't think I flew to Epstein's Isle with kids and tried to score. Ivanka,
His daughter,
would I date her?
he wants to.
Diddle-dum, 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 diddle-I. The story,
It rankles.
so look at.
It's tangled.
Diddle-dum, 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 diddle-I. So I'll release MLK's files and I'll exhume JFK's corpse if it means we'll all forget the Epstein files and how I barged through change room doors.
Now, as you might remember, earlier this month, Trump signed his so-called Big Beautiful Bill into law. As well as adding more than $3 trillion to the federal deficit and leaving millions of Americans without health coverage, the bill also rolls back Biden-era climate policy. As Melina Wicks explains, that could accelerate an energy crisis.
The One Big Beautiful Bill Act tried to cut renewable energy in a big way, which shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone who knows how Trump feels about renewables.
I don't want windmills destroying our place. I don't want, these solar things where they go for miles and they cover up a half a mountain that are ugly as hell.
If only they could figure out a way to make solar farms in gold. Most Republicans were on board with the changes. Congressman Chip Roy, whose last name is a first name and first name is a snack, said we're constraining the hell out of wind and solar, which is good. But that's a weird position to take when you're a congressman from Texas, the top state in America for renewable energy and battery capacity. And Texas isn't the only state that's been putting practicality over politics.
Geography matters more than ideology when it comes to the adoption of green energy. Windy, sparsely populated, and Republican South Dakota, Trump won 63% of the vote in 2024, gets an enormous portion of its retail electricity from renewable sources. Tiny, densely populated Delaware, Joe Biden's home state, gets almost none of its retail electricity from green sources.
It's hard to imagine how a state that's home to Joe Biden could ever be lacking in hot air. It's unclear just how badly renewable energy will be hurt by the bill. To get moderates in the Senate on board, a last-minute loophole was added that extends subsidies for projects that begin construction in the next 12 months. But then to get hardliners in the House on board, Trump signed an executive order attempting to minimize the effects of that loophole. Whether fossil fuels or renewables ultimately come out on top, one thing is undeniable. The US needs more power. And fast.
Powering AI, it is quickly becoming the bottleneck. Data centers, they already consume more electricity than some countries, and that is only expected to triple by the end of the decade.
Turns out having AI write your college essay takes a lot more power than how it was traditionally fueled with ramen noodles. Electricity demand in the US is rising faster than it has in at least 2 decades. And that demand is being met by renewables, with wind, solar and batteries providing over 90% of the new electricity currently being added to the grid. Even if you prefer to get your power from fossil fuels, it can take years to build the power plants needed to meet demand. So if the cuts to renewables take full effect, the US is looking at rising energy demand and less new energy supply. Even if you don't care about climate change, that's still going to be
ugly as hell.
Now, who do you think is Trump's #1 enemy? Is it Jeffrey Epstein, Joe Biden, Xi Jinping? No, Trump's #1 enemy is someone he calls this total and complete moron and a major loser. And
this guy is a numbskull, very average mentally person. He's an average mentally person. He's a knucklehead. I think he's a very stupid person, actually.
I think he hates me, but that's okay. You know, he should. He should. I call him every name in the book.
It's this man, the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, otherwise known as Mr. Too Late.
I call him too late. He's always too late. He's always been too late. Hence his nickname, Too Late.
The problem's this. The Federal Reserve has set their interest rates at just over 4% for Trump's entire second term, and Trump thinks those rates should be much lower.
We should be leading the world. Instead, we're paying 4%.
Trump would like the Federal Reserve to cut their interest rates in the hope that that would cut everyone's mortgage rates, and that would save Americans a lot of money.
And then he goes up and talks about, I'd like to see costs come down. You know, he gets up and he does his little thing for 5 minutes, and he goes out and he goes back to the beach. He goes, I'd like to see costs come down. Well, he could lower the interest cost by $900 billion a year. All he has to do is lower rates.
Now, Powell's just one voice of 12 on the committee that sets interest rates, but he's made very clear why he is against cutting interest rates.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell said today the Trump administration's tariffs have delayed a planned cut to interest rates so far this year.
In effect, we went on hold when we saw the size of the tariffs and essentially all inflation forecasts for the United States went up materially as a consequence of the tariffs.
And that annoyed Trump even more. He got so annoyed he even forgot that he was the guy who appointed Powell back in 2017.
He's a terrible Fed chair. I was surprised he was appointed. I was surprised, frankly, that Biden put him in and extended him.
No, but Powell's term as chair of the Federal Reserve runs until next May. So why doesn't Trump just sack him then? There are a few reasons. Firstly, the Supreme Court won't let him. The Supreme Court suggested that Trump would need a proper reason to legally sack Powell, and if Trump didn't have that good reason, then Powell could sue him. The legal action would drag on until Powell's term ended anyway, and even if Trump did get rid of Powell, his acting replacement in the meantime would be a Biden appointee. Secondly, every time it looks like the president might actually fire Powell, the bond markets go crazy because they really care about this kind of thing.
If Chairman Powell can be fired by the President of the United States, it will crash the markets in the United States. The infrastructure that keeps this stock market strong, and therefore a big part of our economy strong, and therefore a big part of the world economy strong, is the idea that the big pieces move independent of the politics, that somebody is making his, their, her best decisions economically and independently.
So what can Trump do? Well, there is one other way out. If Trump can find some fig leaf reason to sack Powell. And this is why the administration has suddenly become obsessed with the renovations of the Fed building.
You see the construction of this palace, in the words of one former official, upwards of $2.5 billion, massive cost overrun. And we want to make sure we have facts as to the largesse and the extent to which it's overrun, and the plans keep changing. The testimony that he has on the Hill keeps changing. And I think it just points to the fundamental mismanagement of the Fed under the chairman.
The renovations were originally budgeted at $1.9 billion, but costs have since ballooned by 32% to now be estimated at around $2.5 billion. Now, Jerome Powell says that's partly because the original architects wanted to use cheaper glass walls, but 3 Trump appointees from his first administration insisted on the more expensive marble walls. Also, Powell says there have been unforeseen construction conditions, such as more asbestos than anticipated, toxic contamination in the soil, and a higher than expected water table. But Office of Management and Budget Director Russell Vought has accused Powell of misleading Congress about the project, amongst other sins. And Trump has been flat out acting like Powell is corrupt.
And now on top of it, he's building a close to $3 billion little nest egg for himself.
That's pretty unfair. The thing isn't even due to be finished until 2027, after Powell's term is over. The building's not for him, it's for the Fed's 3,000 employees. And besides, Powell has repeatedly asked the Fed's Inspector General to review how he's handled the project. But that hasn't stopped Republicans heaping on the pressure, with one House rep even referring Powell for criminal prosecution. It's gotten to the point where Trump finally thought he'd built the case to sack Powell. So he reportedly showed off a draft letter firing Powell to a dozen House Republicans. And then he polled them as to whether he should indeed sack Powell, although Trump does deny that.
I haven't drafted a letter.
So you didn't show a letter to Republican lawmakers last night?
No, I talked about the concept of fire him. I said, what do you think? Almost every one of them said I should.
Well, regardless, when that news broke, the market freaked out.
But then again, at 10:54 Eastern time, everything got a bit weird, with the headlines coming out about Mr. Trump firing Powell. 30-year yields were hovering right around 5% at 10:54 Eastern. They moved up to 507.5, and when it comes to 10-year, okay, we moved from 444 to 448.5, 4.5 basis points.
Respect the graphs. So now Trump's back down yet again.
Completely ruling out the idea of firing Jerome Powell.
I don't rule out anything, but I think it's highly unlikely unless he has to leave for fraud. I mean, it's possible there's fraud involved with the $2.7 billion renovation. This is a renovation. How do you spend $2.7 billion?
There's just one more problem. This all might be pointless anyway. You see, in the real world, it's the interest rate for 10-year Treasury bonds that controls mortgage rates and car loan rates. If the Fed cuts their fund rates too much and the 10-year Treasury bond interest rates rise as a result of a freak-out, then the economy would actually be slowed down rather than stimulated. It could crash. Note that since September last year, while Fed interest rates have dropped by 1%, Treasury bond rates have actually risen by 0.6%. So Trump really has to make sure the market doesn't melt down. And maybe, John, we've got arguments about the Fed renovations to look forward to for the next 10 months.
It looks like it's about $3.1 billion. It went up a little bit, or a lot. So the 2.7 is now 3.1.
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, it just came out.
Yeah, I haven't heard that from anybody at the Fed. Yeah, you just added in a third building is what that is. That's a third building.
Well, no, but it's a building that's being built.
No, it was built 5 years ago. We finished Martin 5 years ago.
It's part of the overall work.
But it's
So,
not new.
So to make sense of this all, I spoke earlier to Justin Wolfers, a professor of economics and public policy at the University of Michigan. Justin Wolfers, welcome back to Planet America. Now, do you think the Fed's right to hold off on cutting interest rates until we see what happens with the tariffs?
If you'd asked me that question in March or April, I would have said absolutely yes. So the president said, I'm going to change the world economy with tariffs. It wouldn't make sense to change interest rates a week before you figured out what this big disruption was going to be. There's a very, very sound logic to that. The problem is, what if the president never actually decides? Well, I'm talking to you right now in late July, and we're still no clearer on the US position on trade policy than the first few days of the Trump White House. And so it is possible that trade policy becomes the 2025 version of Infrastructure Week, and we'll sort it out next week, every week, forever.
Trump said that right now inflation's not high, so the Fed could easily reduce interest rates. And if inflation does result, then they could just as easily lift interest rates then. What's wrong with that theory?
Chris Waller, who's one of the Federal Reserve governors, a Trump appointee, has made the case that we ought to cut interest rates. And I don't think it's crazy, actually. The unemployment rate has very slowly been drifting up over time. Inflation has been drifting down towards the Fed's 2% target. And we all are expecting some slowing in the economy. And if that's the case, why not lower interest rates? Even so, the president has made it almost impossible to be in favor of doing so without making it look like the Fed got politicized. And were I a Fed governor, I would not want to send a signal that the Fed was going to do anything other than act in the economy's best interest rather than the president's. And he's actually, ironically enough, made it harder for the Fed to cut interest rates. That's the first problem. The second is, you said, well, what if it turns out to be a mistake? They can just reverse course. I agree, that's a great idea. But do you believe this president will later on say, oh, inflation got out of hand, let's reverse course? I don't think he will.
How important is the chair in setting interest rates? I mean, there are 12 people on that committee that makes a decision on interest rates, yet we act like Jerome Powell's making the decision unilaterally. Does it matter who the chair is?
There's many layers of answers to this. So let me start by giving you an historical answer. An historical answer is it's mattered enormously. Alan Greenspan was a very strong chairman of the Fed. He would begin the meetings by saying what he thought ought to happen and then go around the room and let anyone dare to disagree with him. Ben Bernanke was a less strong chair. He actually let other people speak first, but was intellectually he's a truly brilliant economist. And so the sheer force of intellectual leadership is incredibly helpful. The same was true of Janet Yellen. Jay Powell is not an economist by nature, but he's very good at taking a brief. He's in fact a lawyer. So at one level, they're just one person. At another level, they get to show enormous leadership. If Trump were to appoint a charlatan, a crank, a lunatic, a loyalist as Fed chair, it's a pretty good bet that all deference to the Fed chair would go away immediately. The 11 other people on the board, many of whom I know personally, are not going to be led by a fool. And so if he were to appoint a fool, it would have almost no effect. Leadership of that committee is earned. It's not a right.
Justin, there are all these concerns about how the market's going to react if Trump replaces Jerome Powell right now. But Trump's scheduled to be appointing someone new in May next year anyway. So is this just putting off an inevitable reckoning?
Look, today's the day Hulk Hogan died. I'm sure there are wrestlers who Hulk Hogan could have just waited out or beaten, but instead he decided to whack over the back with a steel chair. And that's what the president is doing to Jay Powell. It turns out it's enormously more destructive. And it's destructive because there's a sense in which economic indicators can sometimes become a self-fulfilling prophecy. For instance, if I believe the Fed is going to do whatever it can to keep inflation low, and I own a store, then I don't expect my costs to rise by much next year, so I'm going to keep my prices low. And that creates a virtuous cycle in which I believe that I can trust the Fed is going to deliver low inflation, therefore I don't raise my prices much, and that creates the reality of low inflation. That's the value of an independent central bank. If you take that away, then I start to think this is a real estate developer who's running the central bank, and real estate developers always like low interest rates. Damn the consequences. Oh no, now I'm worried inflation will be high over the next year. That leads me to be worried that my costs are going to rise over the next year. It leads me to believe that my competitors are going to raise their prices over the next year. So I better hop on the train now rather than wait around and charge the wrong price. And so therefore, the very fear that the central bank may serve the political interests of President Trump rather than those of the American people can create the reality of higher inflation expectations leading to higher inflation. And so that's the sense in which markets are very, very much on edge.
So if Trump did sack Powell, how likely do you think it would be that the market would permanently freak out? Or could this just be a case of a few days of chaos and then it would sort itself out?
I think it depends on who he appoints. And so even if he doesn't sack Powell, if he puts in place a toady, that will cause a meltdown straight away. It turns out there's another country which elected a populist strongman who believed deeply in the value of low interest rates and was immune to economic advice from experts. This person was not President Trump, but was Erdogan in Turkey. Erdogan became so frustrated that he appointed a loyalist as the head of the central bank. He signaled that he intended to take control of the central bank. So it wasn't just moving the chair, it was other appointments, changing the powers and so on. So sacking Powell is just one step down a path, but the rest of the path could be pretty ugly. What subsequently happened is that inflation in Turkey rose from about 6% to a high of 86%. Even right now, several years later, inflation in Turkey is above 30%. Now, if I understand that up front, that there's a risk that US inflation doesn't rise to 5%, but rises to 50%, and I think there's a very real chance of that, then that's going to enormously change my willingness to lend money to the US government. That in turn could set off a fiscal crisis, a recession, or all sorts of other things.
Justin, can you explain the mechanism by which the bond market panicking can translate to interest rate hikes on regular people's mortgages? We tend to assume that the Fed controls everyone's interest rates, so why is that not the case?
The interest rate the Fed controls is called the federal funds rate. It's like in Australia, the RBA controls something called the official cash rate. The federal funds rate, you and I can't go and borrow at the federal funds rate or at the RBA cash rate. That's actually, it's a very obscure little interest rate. It's the interest rate that banks charge each other for overnight loans. So none of us are borrowing at the federal funds rate. Now, what Trump can do is if he installed a loyalist, he could tell the loyalist to set the federal funds rate at 1%. He can't insist that the equivalent of the Commonwealth Bank, say Wells Fargo, sets my mortgage at that low rate. And in fact, if he were to direct the Fed to set the interest rate too low, every economist on earth, including those at Wells Fargo, would understand there's an enormous risk this will create inflation. Given that, the amount that they want to be repaid in 10 years' time to lend me money today would be much, much higher. And so even if the official interest rate were down around 1%, the interest rate I would end up paying on my mortgage could be 10% or 20% or 30% and so on.
And if the market did go into a serious meltdown, what's the fear there? Just how bad could it get?
Not allowed to swear on Australian TV, right?
It's all right. Go for it. We can bleep you.
That's how fucking bad it'd be.
So what's the way out of all this for Trump then, in your view? How does he realistically get interest rates as low as possible for regular Americans?
So what he needs to do is turn up to my Econ 101 class that I teach at the University of Michigan and learn that if you set interest rates at the wrong level for too long, you destroy the economy, and that everyone understands that. And so it's a fool's errand to even try. Given that, he should go and find a central banker who he trusts, but not one for whom he is the puppeteer. Someone with some credibility, someone who, if Trump is generally someone who wants the central bank to be a little more dovish, that is to say, worry more about how much stuff is getting made rather than what the inflation rate is, he should appoint someone a little dovish. And frankly, I'm prepared to serve. But he must learn from Turkey. He can't do what Erdogan did. It's too painful. And if he does it, the markets will explode. Everyone will call the White House and say, stop doing it. At some point, even Erdogan learned. It's better to learn by reading the textbook before class than to blow up the global economy and learn after class. So I'm also willing to offer economics tutoring.
Justin Wolfers, thanks for visiting Planet America, and thanks for the hot tip on who's going to be the next Federal Reserve Chair.
Oh yeah, no, it might well. I'm definitely not on the shortlist.
Hunter Biden, the son of America's 46th president, has sounded off at some of the people he thinks wrongfully pushed his father out of last year's presidential election. In a wide-ranging 3-hour interview with podcaster and journalist Andrew Callaghan, Hunter Biden talked about the deaths of his mother and sister and brother, his battle with addiction to alcohol and crack cocaine, how he became central to Republican attacks on his father, and time again he couldn't disguise his anger at prominent Democrats who he believes didn't stand by his father after that disastrous debate against Donald Trump in June last year.
Wait, what the bullshit? You, we love Joe. You have the Pod Save America motherfuckers in the fucking New York Times who were junior fucking speechwriters.
Hunter Biden also gave new insights into the reasons for Joe Biden's terrible debate performance. He says that after several major international trips, the overworked president was taking the sedative Ambien to help him sleep.
He's 81 years old. He's tired as shit. They give him Ambien to be able to sleep. He gets up on the stage and he looks like he's a deer in the headlights.
It was All in all, a fascinating interview with large helpings of denial from a clearly very loyal son, still not wanting to see his father as most of the American electorate and indeed the world saw him last year, simply too old to run for president again, but just not knowing when to quit. But that is all for another weekend edition of Planet America. We're back at the same time next week. And a reminder, the Wednesday night edition is moving to Monday nights from the start of August on ABC TV, right after Media Watch.
Both shows are also posted each week on iView, YouTube and Facebook. And there's a brand new pet podcast available for you in all the very finest pod places. See you there.
Bye-bye.